a phrase from a 14th century mystic named Meister Eckhart. And he said, God becomes and God unbecomes. And of course, the altar where I encountered that unbecoming and rebecoming of God was at the altar of my physical life, my actual embodied body. And so being able to chase that circle of God becoming and unbecoming, of letting yourself unlearn all the broken, devastating, unhealthy things in order to have room to allow the good and whole and true things to take root, that unbecoming has to happen first.
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
Welcome to Theology Curator. My name is Kurt Willems, and if you are here for the first time, I'm so grateful that you've joined me in this journey of a podcast. If you are a regular, welcome back, of course. We're going to be talking to Sarah Bessey today. And Sarah, I think Sarah is one of my favorite people. And I don't say that lightly. I mean that with a lot of sincerity. I think she is someone who gets Jesus, someone who gets the church and the struggles and also the beauties therein. And she is just so compelling as a communicator, whether you hear her speak or you read the written word that she produces. So when I did this interview with Sarah, I had gotten the book that morning. I'd been traveling, and when I got home, it was in my mailbox. And so I only had time to read the first few chapters, if that. And so I scanned through it, tried to get a big picture of what she was doing. And I told her, hey, I've done interviews where I haven't quite read the whole book yet, but just wanted to let you know that right now I'm going to be asking questions based on impressions and just what I know of you and your work. And she was cool with that. She gets it. And what that left me with, though, is that conversation is I really wanted to finish the book. And so that's exactly what I did. In fact, the next day, I had to drive to Canada. And you know what I did? I bought my own copy. I get free copies all the time of books. But I was like, dude, I really want to finish this book. There's something about it that's just, it just means something to me. And so I hopped on Audible. I got a digital copy. I drove from Seattle to Vancouver and then Vancouver back to Seattle. And by the time I got home, I literally parked the car and sat in my car for 2 minutes. And that was the end of the entire book, including a beautiful, painful sort of memorandum at the end to Rachel Held Evans. Let me tell you something that may not quite come through in the interview, and it's probably good. And I'll tell you why I think it's good in a second. This book is possibly my favorite book that I have consumed in a couple of years. Now, let me put some caveats around that, right? I read a lot of different kinds of books, but when it comes to Christian inspiration, reflection, these books that urge you into something, this is definitely my top 5. Probably my top 3 and possibly my number 1. I haven't decided. I'm not good at ranking things. I just know I utterly love it, even more than I thought I would. It made me cry at moments. It captured my imagination at moments. It affirmed things in me at moments, and it challenged me at other times. And so I just want to say that this book, and I'm not going to give away some of the key points in the book that really brought those emotions to me. And that's kind of why I say it's probably good that I hadn't actually been exposed to the whole thing, because I probably would have accidentally, unknowingly, sort of given away too much. And so I want you to be surprised and touched, like I was surprised and touched. But again, this interview isn't going to leave you without anything to gain. In fact, I think it's a beautiful interview. It was a wonderful conversation, at least from my end. And I just wanted to kind of share that with you, that I stepped into the interview having a sense of what the book was doing. And I left the interview saying, wow, what a beautiful and rich conversation with someone that, although I don't know her well, I consider a friend from a distance. And then I listened to the book the next day and I was like, oh my gosh, like Jesus, you're speaking to me in my car as I listen to this thing. It's that profound. So I'm going to leave you with that and tell you that I wholeheartedly recommend you get this book, grab a cup of coffee, sit next to a window, watch the rain fall, and enjoy and savor and learn and discern and be challenged and all of that stuff. Because, friends, this book, it's just... it opens you up in so many kinds of ways when it comes to our pain. This is artful. This is Sarah Bessey at her best. I would say it's her best of the two books I've read, and I love Jesus Feminist. I still have to read Out of Sorts, but of the two so far, I mean, even with my love of her first book, I'm just like, dude, this is something special. This is, you're going to love this book. So with that, I want to introduce the conversation and invite you to just kind of hang out and hear us process some of her journey and why this book came to be. Well, I want to welcome Sarah Bessey to the podcast, and just so thrilled to get to talk to you. I don't think we've ever done a podcast with you before, so this is really a treat. Thanks for...
I know. I finally made it into the inner sanctum. Thank you for inviting me.
you know, you've been so one of the things I may have mentioned this in my first email to you. I'm not sure, but like one of the things that was hard for me. I started the Paulcast, and I was, very much in academic mode when that started. And what it did is it kind of landlocked me on folks I could talk to, because I was really just talking about the Apostle Paul, either scholarly or, sometimes more practitioner. But that was kind of where things were at. And so we've had a bit of a format shift where we've just sort of expanded the possible topics by kind of rebranding a little bit here. And so that means I get to talk to people that don't necessarily write big, thick books about Paul, but write really important books. And so I'm really, really pumped to actually have you on here finally. And I can do that without like bending, there's so much bending I figured out I could do, but finally I was bending topics so much that I was like, this isn't even about Paul. What am I doing? So I'm like, okay, God, you're showing me a little something here. So it's cool. It's cool. So honestly, it's so cool to have you. And, I've tracked with your journey from a long time ago, from probably when I was starting to blog and just sort of engage that world a little bit. And just thrilled to talk about your newest book. But Jesus Feminist, I thoroughly ate that book up. I just remember,
good to hear.
Oh, absolutely. I've quoted it in different contexts. I have a copy of Out of Sorts. I should probably get into sorts a little bit and read that one, but
it's not like you've been busy.
Not at all. But I continue to follow what you're doing and just really believe in your work and your posture, and just really appreciate you. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
It does feel like a lot of ways we've been kind of alongside of each other for a lot of years. I mean, I'm trying to remember when and where I first encountered you. But I mean, you're right. I mean, there's this, that blogging world that kind of, continued to expand and grow and, find different connections and relationships. And so, yeah, it's fun to still be in conversation with each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you have written another book, though, called Miracles and Other Reasonable Things, which I'm enamored with this title. I just love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good. And
we had such a hard time with titles for this one because it's such a weird book. And then all of a sudden when it emerged, it was just like, how could we have even considered any other title? I had the same experience with Jesus Feminist, because that wasn't the original title of that book. And then it was a chapter title. And all of a sudden it just like rose to the surface, and we were like, oh, there it is. That's what it is.
Oh, that's awesome. And I assume that's probably towards the back end of writing your manuscript or somewhere in that process.
Yeah, I think so. I've always been a last, like the title's almost the last thing that I do.
Yeah. No.
Writing.
No. And no, I just thrilled about it. And the subtitle, A Story of Unlearning and Relearning God. So there's a few of us who might relate to some of that. So that's definitely there. But before we jump kind of into your most recent work, for those folks who maybe are newer to your work and what you've been up to, do you mind sharing maybe a bit about your backstory and some of the things you're passionate about and working on now?
Sure. Well, I'm a writer.
Oh,
It's probably already clear. So I've written the 3 books, but then, I got my start in writing actually through blogging back in, I think I was one of the OGs back there in like 03, 04.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was the Wild West a little bit, and before social media kind of, shifted those things. And I think that was really formative for me, in a lot of different ways. And so a lot of people, that was kind of their first introduction to me, was actually in an online space, as opposed to on a bookstore shelf. And then I also do a lot of speaking. So I travel and speak and do conferences and churches and things like that. But I also organize and co-created and now co-host Evolving Faith, which is a conference for people who often have found themselves kind of wandering in the wilderness a bit when it came to their faith. I started that with my dear friend Rachel Held Evans, who passed away earlier this year, and have just continued with that work, even on the other side of that tremendous loss.
Yeah.
And her and I just had a real desire, I think, because both of us had been through a very intense season of deconstruction years before and had written about it together. And then on the other side, we realized as we were holding more and more people's stories with ours, that that's a season of life that isn't shepherded really well in the church, or even spoken about really well or made room for. And so that was kind of our hope for that gathering and that community of people. So it's a real joy and challenge, to shepherd that. And then other than that, I have a lot of passion for maternal health and justice. And I do a lot of work with an organization in Haiti that looks to promote a midwifery model of care in the developing world. And so that's been a real passion of mine as well. We have 4 kids, been married for almost 20 years. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Our kids go from preschoolers to teenagers. So we have a lot of big feelings in our house at times, but it's a lot of fun. We have 3 girls and a boy. They're just the delight of our life, and they keep us pretty busy. If I thought babies were busy, I had yet to encounter middle schoolers.
Ooh,
so.
Well, thanks for that. We've got a 6-year-old and a baby, so.
There you go. It's a good kind of busy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're just moving.
Oh, I believe it. No, I mean, I definitely spent some years in youth ministry, so I kind of, but that was easy. Like they came once or twice a week, just something I was doing, and then they went back to their parents and they navigated.
We did youth ministry too for a number of years, and I remember us being like, "What's so bad about teenagers? These parents."
Yeah.
Then you live with them, and you're like, "Yeah, there it is."
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, that's
also,
so good.
Who trusted us with teenagers when we were like 20, 21, and 22 years old?
That was ridiculous. Yeah, I got my first gig at like 21. I'm like, really? You hired me? Like, I wouldn't hire me. Like, that's crazy.
Some of the kids that were in our youth group, years ago have become friends of ours now. And it's like, really, there's not much of an age difference. Our kids are the same age. Like,
yeah.
They're barely 5 years younger.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And so you've had quite a rich journey, quite a challenging journey, and recently a very challenging one with Rachel. And we don't have to go too far into that, but I just know that was a huge loss for you. And it wasn't this, I didn't carry the weight that you definitely did, but she was someone that really cheered me on too. And someone I really grown to appreciate. And so I just appreciate the way you've held that. And it's been encouraging to see those people who were closest to her, how they've processed that, sometimes publicly and probably privately. And I think honoring both of those spaces is just so important. And so, Yeah, and it's neat that you've been able to continue the work and with Jeff, right? Jeff Chu, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things that Rachel and I did after we had our first Evolving Faith gathering, which, was almost experimental, I think, to us in a way. We were going to see if there was even any interest in anything like this. And the overwhelming response to it, I think we spent most of that first weekend, looking at each other with like equal parts delight and terror.
Yeah.
Just like, what have we done? And so when we came out of the gathering that first time, we sat down together. One of the very first things that we said to each other was, we need Jeff.
Yeah.
We just knew that we needed his, just his giftedness and his anointing, his presence. We needed his leadership. We wanted him to bring all of that to us. But I think the things that he has brought to our community, I never could have known how much we were going to need Jeff. And that, in a lot of ways, I have said since then that I have felt like my friendship with Jeff and my partnership with Jeff is one of the last great gifts that Rachel gave to me. And so navigating this impossible, terrible, devastating thing with him at my side has been, has made it survivable. And so I'm really thankful even for his, he is a pastor in his heart of hearts. And I think that he led in how we have tried to support and love and be alongside of not only Rachel's family, but who are very dear to us.
Yeah.
But also all of the millions of people whose lives intersected with her work and who she meant something to so many people, and learning how to care for them well as they are all grieving alongside of us. It doesn't, negate just because it's secondhand grief. It still is being a huge outpouring of support and love and prayer. And, it's just been a really beautiful thing in the midst of a really terrible, horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just really appreciate the ongoing heart and concern and compassion you have for those folks out there, and holding pain with others is one of the greatest gifts I think that we can have, but it's also one of the hardest things to steward. And so God's blessing on you as you continue to navigate the road ahead and that and many other areas. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This book, in a lot of ways, as I've stepped into it, it's a book with pain also. It's a book with lots of raw experience. And I'd love to hear maybe the process that led to this book. I know sort of in the introduction, you kind of tongue-in-cheek make a joke like, yeah, it's not really my gig to write the next 5 ways to make your marketing blow up or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, thank God, that's so good. I'm kind of the anti-hustle. Yeah, the hustle. Yeah, exactly. And so, but the sense I got, and through that, and just through your kind of ruminations publicly on this book's journey, is that it was not exactly the book you thought you might write. Or am I kind of reading that correctly? Tell me about how this book emerges.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't the book I intended to write. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I kind of thought I had my lane, right? Jesus Feminist and Ed of Sorts, kind of are a similar type of book in that I took an idea or a concept of theological or Christian living. And then, of course, my story is woven through that book. But it's more the supporting character to the idea, right? And, I was planning on writing another book in that same way, and actually ended up having a really devastating car accident a number of years ago. And that rewrote, almost everything. I think a lot of people have moments in their life, whether it's, obvious, like what happened to me, or it's deeply come together for me. I mean, and not for lack of trying, listen. It's not pretty. And yet there was this sense when I finally let go of that need to do the same thing over again, or make myself fit into something that didn't fit anymore. there was a lot of freedom to it. And so this book, I think I even say this maybe in the introduction, but I really felt like I could not continue in any form of public ministry without telling this story and without having it there. And so it's a memoir. I don't know if I'll ever do that again.
Yeah.
But it is more of a memoir with, the ways that I've understood and grown to know God and understand God in this moment and through this lens now, more woven throughout it. And so being able to take an opportunity like that and being able to say, midwife this book into being was actually a real joy for me.
Wow.
Even though it deals with a lot of, painful things and difficult things and grief as well. There was a hopefulness and a dance and a goodness to the work of writing it that made me feel like a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. And I think that's because stories like mine that I live within now, the story that we have found ourselves in as a family even, and for my work, I didn't know that I felt like I saw that reflected back to me. In a lot of work, or a lot of books. They tended to be either, when you're talking about healing and miracles and prayer, a lot of Christian books are written for the winners.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the ones who have their crap together. And when you find yourself on that, Kate Bowler calls it the losing side of life, or you find yourself in the company of those of us who have unanswered prayers, while still holding space for the miraculous and the hope and the goodness, being able to lean into that of kind of trying to find not an either or book, but a both and story was really important and meaningful to me for sure.
Yeah. And that's a real gift to yourself, right? To be able to take these hard experiences. And I know as someone who likes to write words occasionally myself, like taking real raw, challenging things and being able to sit with them and process. There's something cathartic about it that for me, certainly hope even wells up in the process. Like you kind of alluded to, that it was a joyful thing. And my sense is that it's being received with quite a bit of joy. I'm noticing folks talking about it online, and it seems like it's really making an impact on folks. And I guess maybe as a follow-up question, with that as the backstory, what is the thing that you hope folks are really wrestling with? Is it that tension you speak of, that sort of, having the hope of things like miracles, but realizing that sometimes we're not going to get what we want in the journey? Like how would you frame like the big sort of idea that you're inviting folks to sit with you?
That's a good question. I feel like there were a couple of different things that I was carrying with me as I was working. And I think that in a lot of ways, sometimes that can feel very mysterious, right? When you are in the midst of the work, sometimes you're so close to it, you don't even fully understand it. And so being on the other side of it and hearing what has connected with different sorts of people, hearing how they have read it, I mean, it's just been really overwhelming, because it does invite the people to the table who oftentimes are, those kinds of stories are erased or ignored or kind of pushed to the margins a little bit. And I think that for me, it was less, this big, let's put together a big treatise on miracles, right?
Yeah.
On what prayer could be. And more was this sense of when you feel like God has disappeared, what does it look like to shift your line of sight?
Ooh.
Right. Instead of assuming then that everything has disappeared. One thing that really captured my imagination was actually a phrase from a 14th century mystic named Meister Eckhart. And he said in German, which was incredibly beautiful when it used to hear like that, but I won't attempt to do such a thing. It was God becomes and God unbecomes.
Ooh.
And there was this circle to that really captured my imagination. And of course, the altar where I encountered that unbecoming and rebecoming of God was at the altar of my physical life, my actual embodied body, right? And so being able to chase that circle of God becoming and unbecoming, of letting yourself unlearn all the broken, devastating, unhealthy things in order to have room to allow the good and whole and true things to take root, that unbecoming has to happen first.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's the part we want to skip. Right? We just want to keep cramming more goodness and more wholeness and more truth and more things in there. And oftentimes there's just simply not space until you've been emptied out.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, I see it as a companion to a lot of the work that I do through Evolving Faith, of saying, listen, you can talk about theology at the threshold for the wilderness for a really long time, and it can be an exercise of fun. Right? It can be fun to sit in the pub with your IPA and your buddies talking about what you really think about the theory of atonement, like
totally.
So fun. Like you just almost are getting, the ideas and the slippery slope of newness and goodness to learn. And, and it's abstract in a way that is heady. And the thing, though, that usually will cause you to cross that threshold into the wilderness yourself is grief.
Yeah.
You almost, it's a liminal space, and that proximity to suffering, that proximity to grief is the thing that then all of a sudden it's not theology for the fun of it, it's survival, right? It's who is God and who is God not, and what are the ways I have remade or recast God in my image, or the ways that I was maybe taught or introduced to God that are not bringing good fruit or flourishing in my life or the lives of other people. And so I think that overall theme is something that, is consistent throughout a lot of my work, but very explicitly within this one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that contrast, I mean, it rings true just like in my own story, and I know you're, about the Enneagram and all of that kind of stuff. I'm assuming.
Listen,
you've heard.
Would I even be a progressive Christian if I was not all?
Yeah. It's super hip now. Right. So I'm like I never. It's like Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Bible, Enneagram. There's kind of a progression. So, yeah. No, that's I mean, for me, like when I think of the Enneagram, I'm a 7, and so I live in my head, and it's been one of those things where like grief has been for me, just like you described, that space that makes room for wait, I can actually feel the weight of grief. I can actually, and there's something holy about the pain, not caused by God. At least that's how I've deconstructed and reconstructed. But there's this sense that something breaks open in those spaces, and sometimes feels like I'm grabbing for, I'm reaching for straws or something, and survival. That's just such a big word that you brought out. But the beauty on the other side, that seems that compels me, that invites me, I think, to walk the road. But you know what? It's really easy for me, and I don't know, how many other people connect with this, but for me, it's really easy to like, okay, I felt that grief now I'm going to go pop back into happy land, that's just kind of a natural tendency. And so having someone kind of say what you just said in someone's journey, that, hey, you can feel this, you can experience this. And instead of, and sometimes it's forced upon us, right? It's not like, oh, I can choose to feel my pain or not, but there is hope on the other side of it. And I'm curious about that. Like when you think of your own sort of story that you're sharing in the book, what have been some of those elements of hope for you? What are some of those things that have helped you sort of process the journey and continue to walk it forward?
That's a good way to see it. And I think that what you touched on there, Kurt, is a really important reframing even of the wilderness and of these moments in our life and these, whether it's seasons or simply simply a new reality that you now live within. Like for myself, I don't get to go back. Like there's not, I don't get to go back to how things were. And so I think that one of the things to even articulate to one another and to name to one another, and that's important not only for our own selves, but even for cultivating hope and love in the wilderness for one another, is that what we think is actually the wilderness is actually God's grace and goodness, right? The thing that we think is the desert is where we are experiencing an intimacy with God. It's a place that we are called to.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a mark of faithlessness. It's not a mark of hopelessness. It's not a mark of, somehow a slippery slope. But, that instead, usually in Scripture and over again, we see that the wilderness is a place where God calls their people.
Yeah.
Right. And that it is a place where you encounter the living God in ways that disrupt the story. Right. And so I think that being able to name that for one another, to demystify it, and to expand even our understanding of who is dear to Jesus.
Yeah.
Who walks closely with Jesus. I think one of the big things that was a real reframing of hope for me, that I have tried in the last number of years, I think especially for the last 10, to reorient myself to what we often call the margins.
Yeah.
I think that for me, the hope was when I realized that the margins are actually the center of God's kingdom.
Yes.
I was the one in the wrong spot.
Wow.
And because I had centered myself and my own experiences and my way of reading Scripture or my way of living, the whole geography of God's kingdom was off for me. And being able to say, oh, no, wait, this is actually where the center is. What does it look to reorient around the wide and welcoming and good and hopeful and yet honest kingdom of God?
Yeah.
That is the place where you learn that you don't have to choose one or the other. I think sometimes within our Christian traditions, we tend to be like, either you're all in on suffering and sovereignty and, this is just how things are and it's a veil of tears, or you tend to become someone who's like, I'll stuff my fingers in my ears and be like, it's all beautiful. It's all hopeful. God's always flourishing. Everything's amazing. And either way, you're not getting the full picture. And I think that learning how to hold that tension of learning, Walter Brueggemann talks about only those who have actually despaired are even able to truly hope.
Yeah.
In the way that we really understand Christian hope. And so in that way, I think that you can begin to see that you get to and you need to hold both your despair and your honesty and your grief, naming things that are not as though they will be, though. Right. But until you can name it, until you can say this is the grief, that this is the suffering, that this is the loss, that this is the thing, that we are holding in our hand, that your other hand doesn't even get to begin to hold onto hope and joy that has any sort of honesty to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just feels intellectually and spiritually dishonest.
Wow. Well, I think there's a lot there that folks can relate to, that I can relate to, and really appreciate that, the way you're drawing that out. It's definitely been, I think I just shared with you that I was on a 7-day residency for a spiritual director training thing I'm doing. And we had a couple of sessions on pain and suffering and sorrow. And, I'm still kind of like, I'm still processing. It was very rich, but
as a 7, it's hard.
Oh, exactly. Like, that's why I'm like, I pause right there, right? Because I know how hard it is. And yet it's in that space of pain for me that I've been opened up to a reality that is so much more real. So, for me, in recent years, encountering some pain and choosing to let the tears flow, sit with it, let it be raw, the outcome of that has been, maybe I get to reconcile reality that my future isn't always just going to be fixed and great. And, my past wounds are always going to be with me. But not in a sense that they continue to fester, not in a sense that they continue to, re-wound me necessarily, although, everyone's story is complicated. But what if it's through pain that I find more love, more grace, more God, more self. And I'm still learning that, and it's terrifying. But it's stories like the one you're telling that opens folks up to what if we can walk this road and not shy away from it. And so, that's so good. And so, as we come kind of to the tail end of our conversation, I think it's already come up. I think it's already clear, but this is a Jesus book, you know what I mean? And that's something I love about you. You say it like, I underlined it. I got to find it, but you say something to the effect of, you're like all in on Jesus. And
listen, I have like zero chill.
That's it. That's the line. That's the line. Oh my gosh. And I was like, damn.
Not over it. Not over him.
Zero chill. That was just, that hit me. That hit me. Yes. I was about to thumb through it. You knew what I was getting at. That's, and so.
In some ways, I think, that's kind of the, I joke about it, but in a lot of ways, I think that sometimes that's it. It's different for people. And so you just might as well put your cards on the table and be like, this is 100%. I don't think I managed to preach the first 5 years I was preaching without like bawling every time I would even say the name Jesus.
Wow. Wow.
Oh. And to me, it feels very real, and it's very much at the center of my understanding of God and of how I structure my life and following Jesus. But even I think that there needs to be some honesty about the fact that, I come from a charismatic tradition. My parents were first generation believers in the charismatic renewal movement in the 70s and 80s, roots in Pentecostalism. And that is a part of my faith that I have kept quite, while acknowledging it and naming it, I haven't been very vulnerable with it. I haven't been very open, I think, about those things. And I think that's because people like me who believe in the active and intimate leading of the Holy Spirit in our lives right now, it's a hard line to walk, right? Because you don't want to become, a wound in someone else's story. And then also, let's be frank, there's a lot of weirdness. Tradition.
Yeah, sure.
So this is also one of those stories that is as honest about the fact that I love Jesus. I still have stars in my eyes about Jesus, while also saying, look, we're going to just pull the curtain back on Holy Spirit stuff. We're going to go all in on the woo-woo. Like, we're just going to for it. So.
Oh, yes. No. And that's, what I find, because I'm not as good at saying what you just said, because that was awesome. But when it comes to Jesus, like, that's for me, the center of my existence, and what's beautiful about that is I have seen there's a community of folks that exists all over the world that are saying, we don't want less Jesus. We want more Jesus. Right? We just want space to ask questions of who is this Jesus a little more, like what, we need to unpack some of the stuff we were handed, and voices like you are just creating a pathway where folks can say, actually, I thought I was a follower of Jesus in one way. And as I've come through the other side of my own wilderness or my own deconstruction or whatever word they might use, depending on their own specific situation, they come out the other side often saying, I'm enamored by Jesus, and not this abstraction, but the God made flesh who abides with me, who knows me, who invites me, who brings me into newness, And so I just know that is one of the things that has been so appealing about your work. You're willing to say, hey, let's unpack some of the BS here, but let's also remember the beauty that we find in the face of Jesus. And that is so cool. And so as you think of this book, and you've basically said it, but maybe one last shot here to draw this out a little bit more is, what do you sense Jesus inviting you in, and perhaps readers in, as you consider this book and maybe beyond this book?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what the ground that we've covered today probably points to the heart of it. But I think that one of the things that I was really hopeful for, and I guess we'll see whether or not this is something that comes to be for people, was wanting to reclaim a sense of curiosity about Jesus, sense of wonder.
Yeah.
Even. I think, in a lot of ways, the way that we have kind of structured religion or Christianity right now is that we're answering a lot of questions that people aren't asking.
Yeah.
And so, and it's fun, right, for insiders. But when your life kind of intersects with a lot of those questions, what are the questions that we're actually asking about suffering and about God and about being known? About who matters.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah. About how much your story matters and how you encounter God, how you have a line of sight to Jesus. And I think that, being able to reclaim that sense of curiosity and wonder around not only the story of Jesus, but even the ways that story intersects with your own, and even a sense of possibility.
Yeah.
Right, of reframing things. I think that I had a definition of miracles that served me for a time, and was a helpful starting point. But in a lot of ways, I felt like the book, even mirrored Ricoeur's, first naivete, critical distance, second naivete, of, we kind of go through these moments in our life where we have one way where we've understood God or understood a concept even, or Jesus or a theological idea. And then we kind of hit that point of critical distance, right? Of being like, that's not really what it is. And here's what it actually is. And what about? And, and you can remain there, for a really long time. And a lot of people, that's when they start writing their books.
Yep.
Yep. In that critical distance stage. But I have found that if you keep following Jesus, if you keep leaning into your pain, if you keep pressing through that wilderness, on the other side, there is an altar in the wilderness, a feast in that place that leads to what he called a second naivete, which is I can gather up all of this. I can gather up the first ways that I understood and knew and was introduced to Jesus with all of its flaws and brokenness and goodness and innocence. And I can also gather in all my questions and my doubts and my hopes and my, wounds that have also come along. And then there is still a feast there in that place of leaning into it. And then you see the face of God. And so I think that's a hopefulness. I think that that requires a level of unclenching our hands, in some ways, and that can be a hard posture to strike when you're talking about people's pain, right? We clench up, right? That's what we do, right? We get tense, and that makes us feel pain more, and then we feel more afraid. And interrupting that cycle, can be the thing that actually ends up, pushing you into new life.
Yeah. Well, my friend, that in itself, that is a miracle. That is the miracle of the goodness of Jesus in the world, and even in the wilderness where that feast is being prepared. So thank you. Oh, thank you so much. And
thank you.
What a great time to just kind of wrap up here and say thank you. Thank you for your work, your voice, your wisdom, both learned and experienced. And I hope folks will go out and read Miracles and Other Reasonable Things.
Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation and your friendship.
Well, friends, I hope this conversation encouraged you. It definitely encouraged me. Again, I can't recommend the book highly enough. I know I gave a long commercial at the beginning of this podcast, so I'm not going to say much more about it. I also want to invite you, if you are someone who's been tracking with this podcast and want to make sure that you are up to date on what's going on, I also have a newsletter that often is paired with the podcast. So right now, the series we've been walking through is called The Bible, and I believe we have 4 or 5 parts of that already published by the time you're going to be hearing this. And what I basically do in those kind of series is I write a newsletter article, basically. And then after I do that, I record a podcast based on the newsletter article. And so you can get both of those by going to theologycurator.com/newsletter. That's theologycurator.com/newsletter. And besides that, my friends, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great week. Enjoy the good, enjoy the beautiful, enjoy the things that God has brought into this present moment of your life. And may you go empowered, knowing that there is a God who loves you, who is for you, and who wants to see you thrive in your humanity, just like Jesus.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.